Section 5 of the Negro Problem. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. The Negro Problem. Section 5. The Characteristics of the Negro People by H.T. Kealing. A frank statement of the virtues and failings of the race, indicating very clearly the evils which must be overcome and the good which must be developed if success is really to attend the effort to uplift them. The characteristics of the Negro are of two kinds, the inborn and the inbred. As they reveal themselves to us, this distinction may not be seen, but it exists. Inborn qualities are ineradicable. They belong to the blood. They constitute individuality. They are independent, or nearly so, of time and habitat. Inbred qualities are acquired and are the result of experience. They may be overcome by a reversal of the process which created them. The fundamental, or inborn characteristics of the Negro may be found in the African as well as the American Negro, but the inbred characteristics of the latter belong to the American life alone. There is but one human nature, made up of constituent elements the same in all men, and racial or national differences arise from the predominance of one or another element in this or that race. It is a question of proportion. The Negro is not a Caucasian, not a Chinese, not an Indian, though no psychological quality in the one is absent from the other. The same moral sense called conscience, the same love of harmony in color or in sound, the same pleasure in acquiring knowledge, the same love of truth in word or of fitness in relation, the same love of respect and approbation, the same vengeful or benevolent feelings. The same appetites belong to all, but in varying proportions. They form the indicia to a people's mission and are our best guides to God's purpose in creating us. They constitute the material to be worked on in educating a race and suggest in every case where the stress of civilization or education should be applied in order to follow the lines of least resistance. But there are also certain manifestations, the result of training or neglect, which are not inborn. As they are inculcable, so they are eradicable, and it is only by a loose terminology that we apply the term characteristics to them, without distinction between them and the inherent traits. In considering the characteristics of the Negro people, therefore, we must not confuse the constitutional with the removable. Studied with sympathy and at first hand, the black man of America will be seen to possess certain predominant idiosyncrasies of which the following form a fair catalog. He is intensely religious. True religion is based upon a belief in the supernatural, upon faith and feeling. A people deeply superstitious are apt to be deeply religious, for both rest upon a belief in a spiritual world. Superstition differs from religion in being the untrained and unenlightened gropings of the human soul after the mysteries of the higher life, while the latter, more or less enlightened, feels after God if haply it may find him. The Negro gives abundant evidence of both phases. The absolute inability of the master in the days of slavery, while successfully vetoing all other kinds of convocation, to stop the Negro's church meetings, as well as the almost phenomenal influence and growth of his churches since, and his constant referring of every event, adverse or favorable, to the personal ministrations of the Creator, are things unique and persistent, and the master class reposed more faith in their slaves' religion ofttimes than they did in their own. Doubtless, much of the reverential feeling that pervades the American home today, above that of all other nations, is the result of the Negro mammy's devotion and loyalty to God. He is imaginative. This is not evinced so much in creative directions as in poetical, musical, combinatory, inventional, and what, if coupled with learning, we call literary imagination. Negro eloquence is proverbial. The crudest sermon of the most unlettered slave abounded in tropes and glowing tongue pictures of apocalyptic visions all his own. And indeed, the poetic quality of his mind is seen in all his natural efforts when the self-consciousness of education does not stand guard. The staid religious muse of Phyllis Wheatley and the rollicking, somewhat jibing verse of Dunbar show it equally unpremeditated and spontaneous. I've heard by the hour some ordinary old uneducated Negro tell those inimitable animal stories brought to literary existence in Uncle Remus, with such quaint humor, delicious conceit, and masterly delineation of plot, character, and incident, that nothing but the conventional rating of Aesop's fables could put them in the same class. Then, there are more Negro inventors than the world supposes. This faculty is impossible without a well-ordered imagination held in leash by a good memory and large perception. He is affectionate and without vindictiveness. He does not nurse even great wrongs. Mercurial as he is, often furiously angry and frequently in murderous moods, he comes nearer not letting the sun go down upon his anger than any other man I know. Like Brutus, he may be compared to the flint, which, much enforced, shows a hasty spark, and straight is cold again. His affection is not less towards the Caucasian than to his own race. It is not saying too much to remark that the soul of the Negro yearns for the white man's goodwill and respect, and the old ties of love that subsisted in so many instances in the days of slavery still survive where the ex-slave still lives. The touching case of a Negro bishop who returned to the state in which he had been a slave and rode 20 miles to see and alleviate the financial distress of his former master is an exception to numerous other similar cases only in the prominence of the Negro concerned. I know of another case of a man whose tongue seems dipped in hyssop when he begins to tell of the wrongs of his race, and who will not allow anyone to say in his presence that any good came out of slavery, even incidentally. Yet he supports the widowed and aged wife of his former master. And surely, if these two instances are not sufficient to establish the general proposition, none will gainsay the patience, vigilance, loyalty, and helpfulness of the Negro slave during the Civil War, and of his good old wife who nursed white children at her breast at a time when all ties save those of affection were ruptured, and when no protection but devoted hearts watched over the great house, whose head and master was at the front fighting to perpetuate slavery. Was it stupidity on the Negro's part? Not at all. He was well informed as to the occurrences of the times. A Freemasonry kept him posted as well as the whites were themselves on the course of the war and the issue of each battle. Was it fear that kept him at the old home? Not that either. Many thousands did cross the line to freedom. Many other thousands, 200,000, fought in the ranks for freedom. But none of them, those who went and those who stayed, those who fought and those who worked, betrayed a trust, outraged a female, or rebelled against a duty. It was love, the natural wellings of affectionate natures. He has great endurance, both dispositional and physical. So true is the first, that his patience has been the marvel of the world, and indeed, many, regarding this trait, manifested in such an unusual degree, doubted the Negro's courage, till the splendid record of the 60s and the equal but more recent record of the 90s wrote forbearance as the real explanation of an endurance seemingly so at variance with manly spirit. Of his physical powers, his whole record as a laborer at killing tasks in the most trying climate in America speaks so eloquently that nothing but the statistics of cotton, corn, rice, sugar, railroad ties, and felled forests can add to the praise of this burden bearer of the nation. The census tables here are more romantic and thrilling than figures of rhetoric. He is courageous. His page in the war record of this country is without blot or blemish. His commanders unite in pronouncing him admirable for courage in the field, commendable for obedience in camp. That he should exhibit such excellent fighting qualities as a soldier, and yet exercise the forbearance that characterizes him as a citizen, is remarkable. He is cheerful. His ivories are as famous as his songs. That the South is sunny is largely due to the brightness his rollicking laugh and unfailing good nature bring to it. Though the mudsill of the labor world, he whistles as he holds, and no dark broodings or whispered conspirings mar the cheerful acceptance of the load he bears. Against the rubber bumper of his good cheer, things that have crushed and maddened others rebound without damage. When one hears the quaint Jubilee songs set to minor cadence, he might suppose them the expressions of a melancholy people. They are not to be so interpreted. Rather, are they the expression of an experience, not a nature. Like the subdued voice of a caged bird, these songs are the coinage of an occasion, and not the free note of nature. The slave sang of griefs he was not allowed to discuss, hence his songs. This cheerfulness has enabled the Negro to live and increase under circumstances which, in all other instances, have decimated, if not exterminated, inferior peoples. His plasticity to molding forces and his resiliency against crushing ones comes from the lion philosophy, unconscious and unstudied, that extracts Epicurean delights from funeral meats. The above traits are inborn and fundamental, belonging to the race everywhere, in Africa as well as America. Strict correctness requires, however, that attention be called to the fact that there are tribal differences among African Negroes that amount almost to the national variations of Europe, and these are reflected in American Negroes, who are the descendants of these different tribes. There is as much difference between the Mandingo and the Hottentot, both black, as between the Italian and the German, both white, or between the Bushman and the Zulu, both black, as between the Russian and the Englishman, both white. Scientific exactness, therefore, would require a closer analysis of racial characteristics than an article of this length could give. But speaking in a large way, it may be said that in whatever outward conformity may come to the race in America by reason of training or contact, these traits will lie at the base, the very warp and woof of his soul texture. If now we turn to consider his inbred traits, those the result of experience, conditions, and environments, we find that they exist mainly as deficiencies and deformities. These have been superimposed upon the native soul endowment. Slavery has been called the Negro's great schoolmaster, because it took him a savage and released him civilized, took him a heathen and released him a Christian, took him an idler and released him a laborer. Undoubtedly, it did these things superficially, but one great defect is to be charged against this school. It did not teach him the meaning of home, purity, and providence. To do this is the burden of freedom. The emancipated Negro struggles up today against many obstacles, the entailment of a brutal slavery. Leaving out of consideration the many who have already emerged, let us apply our thoughts to the great body of submerged people in the congested districts of city and country who present a real problem and who must be helped to higher things. We note some of the heritages under which they stagger up into full development. Shiftlessness. He had no need to devise and plan in bondage. There was no need for an enterprising spirit. Consequently, he is lacking in leadership and self-reliance. He is inclined to stay in ruts and applies himself listlessly to a task, feeling that the directive agency should come from without. Incontinence. It is not to the point to say that others are too. Undoubtedly, example has as much to do with this laxity as neglect. We simply record the fact. A slave's value was increased by his prolificacy. Begetting children for the auction block could hardly sanctify family ties. It was not nearly so necessary for a slave to know his father as his owner. Added to the promiscuity encouraged and often forced among this class was the dreadful license which cast lustful Caucasian eyes upon likely Negro women. Indolence. Most men are, especially in a warm climate. But the Negro acquired more than the natural share because, to him, as a bondman, laziness was great gain, for he had no pecuniary interest in his own labor. Hence, holidays were more to be desired than whole labor days, and he learned to do as little as he might, be excused as often as he could, and hail Saturday as the oasis in a desert week. He hails it yet. The labor efficiency of the Negro has greatly increased since the emancipation, for self-interest is a factor now. In 1865, each Negro produced 2/3 of a bale of cotton. Now he produces an average of 1 whole bale to the man. But there is still woeful waste of productive energy. A calculation showing the comparative productive capacity, man for man, between the northern and southern laborer would be very interesting. Improvidence and extravagance. He will drop the most important job to go on an excursion or parade with his lodge. He spends large sums on expensive clothing and luxuries while going without things necessary to a real home. He will cheerfully eat fat bacon and pone cornbread all the week in order to indulge in unlimited soda water, melon, and fish at the end. In the cities, he is oftener seen dealing with the pawnbroker than the banker. His house, when furnished at all, is better furnished than that of a white man of equal earning power, but it is on the installment plan. He is loath to buy a house because he has no taste for responsibility, nor faith in himself to manage large concerns. But organs, pianos, clocks, sewing machines, and parlor suits on time have no terrors for him. This is because he has been accustomed to think in small numbers. He does not regard the Scotchman's mickle because he does not stop to consider that the end is a muckle. He has amassed, at full valuation, nearly $1 billion worth of property despite this. But this is about 1/2 of what proper providence would have shown. Untidiness. Travel through the South and you will be struck with the general misfit and dilapidated appearance of things. Palings are missing from the fences. Gates sag on single hinges. Houses are unpainted. Window panes are broken. Yards unkempt. And the appearance of a squalor greater than the real is seen on every side. The inside of the house meets the suggestions of the outside. This is a projection of the slave's quarters into freedom. The cabin of the slave was, at best, a place to eat and sleep in. There was no thought of the aesthetic in such places. A quilt on a plank was a luxury to the tired farmhand, and paint was nothing to the poor, sun-scorched fellow who sought the house for shade rather than beauty. Habits of personal cleanliness were not inculcated, and even now it is the exception to find a modern bathroom in a southern home. Dishonesty. This is the logic, if not the training, of slavery. It is easy for the unrequited toiler in another's field to justify reprisal. Hence, there arose among the Negroes an amended commandment which added to "Thou shalt not steal" the clause, "except thou be stolen from." It was no great fault then, according to this code, to purloin a pig, a sheep, a chicken, or a few potatoes from a master who took all from the slave. Untruthfulness. This is seen more in innocent and childish exaggeration than in vicious distortion. It is the vice of untutored minds to run to gossip and make miracles of the matter of fact. The Negro also tells falsehoods from excess of good nature. He promises to do a piece of work on a certain day because it is so much easier and pleasanter to say yes and stay away than it is to say no. Business unreliability. He does not meet a promise in the way and at the time promised. Not being accustomed to business, he has small conception of the place the promise has in the business world. It is only recently he has begun to deal with banks. He who has no credit sees no loss of it in a protested note, especially if he intends to pay it sometime. That chain which links one man's obligation to another man's solvency, he has not considered. He is really as good and safe a debt payer when he owes a white man as the latter can have. But the methods of the modern bank placing a time limit on debts is his detestation. He much prefers the laissez-faire of the southern plantation store. Lack of initiative. It was the policy of slavery to crush out the combining instinct, and it was well done, for outside of churches and secret societies, the Negro has done little to increase the social efficiency which can combine many men into an organic whole, subject to the corporate will and direction. He has, however, made some hopeful beginnings. Suspicion of his own race. He was taught to watch other Negroes and tell all that they did. This was slavery's native detective force to discover incipient insurrection. Each slave learned to distrust his fellow, and added to this is the knowledge one Negro has that no other has had, half sufficient experience in business to be a wise counselor or a safe steward of another man's funds. Almost all Negroes who have acquired wealth have entrusted its management to white men. Ignorance. The causes of his ignorance all know. That he has thrown off one half of it in 40 years is a wonderful showing, but a great incubus remains in the other half, and it demands the nation's attention. What the census calls literacy is often very shallow. The cause of this shallowness lies in part in the poor character and short duration of Southern schools, in the poverty that snatches the child from school prematurely to work for bread, in the multitude of mushroom colleges and get-smart-quick universities scattered over the South, and in the glamour of a professional education that entices poorly prepared students into special work. Add to this, too, the commercialism of the age which regards each day in school as a day out of the market. Boys and girls by scores learn the mechanical parts of typewriting and stenography without the basal culture which gives these callings their greatest efficiency. They copy a manuscript, Chinese-like, mistakes and all. They take you phonetically in sense as well as sound, having no reserve to draw upon to interpret a learned allusion or unusual phrase. Thus, while prejudice makes it hard to secure a place, auto-deficiency loses many a one that is secured. We have discussed the leading characteristics of the Negro, his inborn excellencies and inbred defects, candidly, and as they are to be seen in the great mass whose place determines the status of the race as a whole. It would, however, be to small purpose if we did not ask what can be done to develop the innate good and correct the bad in a race so puissant and numerous. This mass is not inert. It has great reactionary force, modifying and influencing all about it. The Negro's excellencies have entered into American character and life already. So have his weaknesses. He has brought cheer, love, emotion, and religion in saving measure to the land. He has given it wealth by his brawn and liberty by his blood. His self-respect, even in abasement, has kept him struggling upward. His confidence in his own future has infected his friends and kept him from nursing despondency or planning anarchy. But he has laid and does lay burdens upon the land too. His ignorance, his low average of morality, his low standards of home, his lack of enterprise, his lack of self-reliance, these must be cured. Evidently, he is to be solved by educational processes. Every one of his inborn traits must be respected and developed to proper proportion. Excesses and excrescences must not be carelessly dealt with, for they mark the fertility of a soil that raises rank weeds because no gardener has tilled it. His religion must become ethics touched with feeling, not a paroxysm, but a principle. His imagination must be given a rudder to guide its sails, and the first fruits of its proper exercise, as seen in a Dunbar, a Chestnut, a Coleridge Taylor, and a Tanner, must be pedestaled along the Appian Way over which others are to march. His affection must be met with larger love, his patience rewarded with privilege, his courage called to defend the rights of others rather than redress his own wrongs. Thus shall he supplement from within the best efforts of good men without. To cure the evils entailed upon him by an unhappy past, he must be educated to work with skill, with self-direction, in combination and unremittingly. Industrial education with constant application is the slogan of his rise from racial pauperism to productive manliness. Not that exceptional minds should not have exceptional opportunities, and they already exist, but that the great majority of awkward and unskilled ones, who must work somehow, somewhere, all the time, shall have their opportunities for training in industrial schools near them, and with courses consonant with the lives they are to lead. Let the 99 who must work, either with trained or fumbling hands, have a chance. Train the Negro to accept and carry responsibility by putting it upon him. Train him more than any schools are now doing in morals, to speak the truth, to keep a promise, to touch only his own property, to trust the trustworthy among his own race, to risk something in business, to strike out in new lines of endeavor, to buy houses and make homes, to regard beauty as well as utility, to save rather than display. In short, let us subordinate mere knowledge to the work of invigorating the will, energizing productive effort and clarifying moral vision. Let us make safe men rather than vociferous mountebanks. Let us put deftness in daily labor above sleight-of-hand tricks, and common sense, well trained, above classical smatterings, which awe the multitude, but butter no parsnips. If we do this, America will have enriched her blood, ennobled her record, and shown the world how to deal with its dark races without reproach. End of section 5, recording by James K. White, Chula Vista.